Obamacare. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Stupid people are ruining America.
The president just wants to take care of you. He just doesn't think you're able to do it for yourself.
There's a very thin line between communism, progressivism, Marxism, socialism.
The empire will strike back.
You still don't know that this was political.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of America Our Way. I am your host, Dustin Hoyt. We've got a great show planned for you today. I hope you've had a good week. As many of you know, you regulars, I did not do a show last week. If you do or do not know, I work in the Central Texas area, very close to Fort Hood, in the news business. And because I work in that area, I was really bogged down covering that as a producer. Now, while I myself wasn't reporting on it or anything, but it's a big group effort to get a top-notch news program put out there. And, you know, after all the extra hours that it put in, I just was burned out. But I figured because of my proximity to it, we could start off talking about the Fort Hood shooting. The second one happened last week. Now, the big thing to understand is that obviously this is not terrorism. This was not an instance of jihad. It was not an instance of somebody trying to, you know, incite terrorism or anything like that. It was a spontaneous event triggered by an individual with mental health problems. But it is an interesting case, and it does spark a lot of debate. And it's been pretty sad because the whole sad ordeal has brought out people in the gun control, pro-gun argument, and both sides have come out. And it was, just for example, President Obama Wednesday, was in Texas giving a speech at Fort Hood for the memorial service, and he spoke about the need to get mental illness covered in terms of gun purchases and background checks and stuff like that. He touched on it, but respectfully stayed away from it. So we got to give him credit where it's due, but he came awful close. I thought he was going to slip into it, but thankfully he didn't go there. But a lot of people have, and a lot of the major networks have been covering it. They've been talking about how guns on bases either need to go away or need to come together. Now, the funny part of the discussion is it's mostly the left is coming out, the authoritarians are coming out and saying that, you know, this is just another example of why gun control is so important. And, you know, the guy bought the gun at the same place as Nidal Hasan, who did the first Fort Hood shooting, which was an act of terrorism. He's shouting Allahu Akbar and killing soldiers. Now, the interesting part is that the left is coming out and saying that this is a clear-cut example of why gun control is so important and why gun control needs to happen. And on the right, you've got people saying that guns need to be more prevalent on bases. You even had some people say every man, woman, and child should be armed on the base. And, of course, you've had a multitude of people come out and say there's no way that that's feasible. And then there's a whole discussion going on about mental illness, which, of course, is the correct one to be having. And thankfully, the narrative has stayed on point thus far, talking about mental illness. But I want to address a couple of things first off. The initial reports came out, and a lot of reporters were asking questions, and thankfully it was none of my reporters that slipped into this, or any reporters I'm affiliated with. And they were asking questions of Lieutenant General Milley, who is the commander of Fort Hood, saying, you know, do you think that people should be allowed to conceal carry on base after this second shooting? And he said, that's against regulations. It's against the law. And a lot of people took that to mean that the general is against concealed carry. Now, that's not what he said. He said it's against the law. It's against the rules. The rule was instituted under H.W. Bush and implemented under Clinton, during the Clinton administration. So it was during that era when concealed carry was pulled off of bases. It's just MPs that have guns, and the guns are not everywhere all over military bases like people think. Our soldiers are not armed on base. ironically enough. And they're not allowed to be. They're not allowed to be. The only place that soldiers are allowed to have firearms is on the firing range, and even then, they have to have special permissions to do that. And the only exception is MPs, and I believe some of the higher officers may be able to do that, but I'm not 100% on that. But the point is, the only place on Fort Hood where you're going to see, or on any military installation for that matter, you're going to see people with weapons at guard posts. You're going to see them on firing ranges. That's it. Just military police in different areas, mostly just at the perimeter, in the guard post, and at the guard station, the military police station. That's it. You don't have a bunch of people with guns roaming around. You don't have soldiers marching with loaded weapons in formation on base. It is not this fortified garrison of unstoppable death warriors that a lot of people think when they think military. It's not to disparage our military. They're the best in the world. We know this. Back-to-back World War champs, as the T-shirt says. But you have to keep in mind that these guys are not allowed to carry their weapons on base. Now, the discussion becomes, if they were allowed to have weapons on base, would that have escalated or changed the situation or helped it? Now, arguably, soldiers with firearms can protect themselves. It's an obvious argument. It's one any common-sense individual is going to make, and it's a good one. It's a good argument. It is. Now, the other problem is that a lot of soldiers, and not all of them, and it doesn't affect all of them, but a lot of soldiers do have mental disorders from their time in war. They have PTSD. They have chronic depression, insomnia. They have bipolar disorder, mood swings, and they do become unstable from the stuff that they see fighting for our freedom. That happens. That's a fact that you can't get past. As much as you support the military, you have to understand that a lot of the mental illness diseases that would disqualify someone from holding a weapon exist in veterans that have gone to war. And quite frankly, when you've got a number of veterans, such as this one, with undiagnosed PTSD, he was on some drugs for depression and insomnia, that sort of thing, but he was not, diagnosed with PTSD. The argument becomes, how do you find and prevent these individuals from having weapons? And the argument is the only way you can prevent it is by preventing all people from having weapons, if that's what you're trying to do. Now, obviously, on the right side of the aisle, the rights side of the aisle, you would say that, well, then more people should be armed because then these guys are less likely to engage in a cowardly attack. The proof being in the pudding for that argument, because when he was confronted by a military police officer who did discharge her weapon in his direction, didn't hit him, but did fire a shot at him, the guy put his gun to his head and killed himself. He didn't try to shoot the MP. He didn't try to continue his rampage. He killed himself outright when he was confronted with a gun. And we've seen that time and time again with every mass shooter situation, that as soon as they're confronted by someone else with a firearm, 90% of the time they turn the gun on themselves, or they're killed by that person with the firearm. So when you're looking at this situation, obviously, you've got Fort Hood being a different situation the first time around. Nadal Hassan, rather than be confronted, he was willing to martyr himself. He fired shots at the MPs, but he was confronted by police and stopped by police. Point being, he was stopped by people with guns. Otherwise, he would have just continued on his merry way. Now, the gun control argument in this debate has a little bit more weight because of the government involvement. And I know that sounds weird, but just hear me out. When you're looking at Fort Hood, you have to understand it is a military installation. And as a military installation, these people sign their butt away to Uncle Sam. Period. They give up their rights to serve Uncle Sam. If Uncle Sam says jump, they say how high. That's what they signed up for. I mean, these people sign up to get blown up and shot at, all in the name of our freedom. But their boss is Uncle Sam. Their commander-in-chief at the moment is President Barack Obama. So if Obama says, guess what, you guys don't get to have guns, them's just the breaks. It's what they sign up for when they join the military, especially if they join under a Democrat president or they stay in under a Democrat president. I mean, you know what you're getting yourself into in that situation. But the point I want to make is that this guy was in the process of being treated for mental illness and was able to buy a gun. Now, most people argue that someone with a mental illness should not be allowed to buy a gun. I mean, that's the majority of Americans say that. If you've got a diagnosed mental illness, such as bipolar disorder or PTSD, something that, could make you trigger violent episodes, those sorts of diseases should prohibit you from owning a firearm. And our background check system in America currently is not properly linked up with the mental health system. You don't get a red flag on your federal background check for having, PTSD or something to that effect. And it becomes a discussion of, do you want to have the government, A, possessing your mental health records, and B, do you think they have a right to hold that information in a regular background check? Now, this is a concern because when police stop you for, say, a traffic violation, oftentimes they check your record. And arguably, with whatever system the federal government institutes, because there's always unintended consequences and they never do it right, and it's government, it would, in effect, cause police to get you pinged for mental health issues every time they pull you over. So they'll pull you over for a traffic accident, run your background, and they'll see that you've got a mental health disorder. They're more likely to engage you with more force in those situations because of your mental health situation. And so that could result in a lot of people with, depression or anxiety disorders or something like that to be victims of police brutality or, accidental police fatalities or excessive force or anything like that. And as we've seen with many police, they don't need an extra reason to use a gun on somebody. Because more often than not, police are taught flat out, if your life's in danger, use deadly force. Don't, put yourself at risk when you're in a dangerous situation. And, it's nothing more than you would tell your average American citizen. But with police, obviously they are in a job where they are put in these situations on a regular basis. So they encounter these situations a lot more. And you've seen the videos online. I've seen them. We've all seen them. They're on the news. Of police pulling guns and shooting people because they get scared in situations that they shouldn't necessarily be scared in. For instance, recently there was a police officer that shot, a 70, 80-year-old vet while he was getting the cane out of the back of his truck. Shot him a bunch of times. Unloaded the clip on the truck, only hit him a few times. And it's a hard question to say, do we want mental health checks to be included in regular background checks, because it will pop on police stuff, and those police will then be more inclined to treat you aggressively. That being said, there are also instances, there was one in Dallas, for instance, where people with mental health issues who are not necessarily violent, but are just they don't act and react regularly, they engage those people with deadly force when they ought not to. For instance, I'll give you two examples. There was a mentally unstable man who was sitting in the driveway, and he had a knife, but all he did was stand up, and then police unloaded their guns on him because he stood up. He didn't run at him. He didn't lunge at him. He just stood up. And more importantly, the police did not deploy tasers first. They immediately deployed firearms. And another situation, there was a soldier in the Fort Hood Temple area who made a call to police because he was going to commit suicide, had a knife to his own throat. Police show up, and he took a step forward towards the police. He still had the knife to his own throat, and the police shot him, and he died. Now, I actually talked to the guy's dad on the phone, and he said that police were investigating it now and actually kicked him out of the hospital and wouldn't let him see his son. His son died. He had done several tours in Iraq. He had PTSD. He had depression, invisible war scars, if you will. So with this whole Fort Hood debate, we're getting into the gun debate, and it's a good one in terms of soldiers because of the mental health issues that present themselves in these situations. Now, I'm not saying one way or the other because I want to look into it further, and especially because I don't trust the government to do it right, but I think it is a conversation worth having. We'll have more when we come back.
Hey, this is Alfonso Rachel with 20 Pound Sledge and PJTV Zone Nation, and you're listening to VLR.
All right, now we're back. I want to move on, and I want to talk about something that's been making headlines. You've got Louis Gohmert, representative out of East Texas, Nacogdoches area, going up against Attorney General Eric Holder. Now, Attorney General Eric Holder, people have talked about contempt of Congress. He's never been cleared of that. And there's been an ongoing investigation with Fast and Furious, and now you've got decriminalization of drugs, which the way they're going about it is like the executive branch is deciding to not enforce things that are law. Now, it's not specifically that. There's a longer explanation of it, but we'll get into that later. I want to start with Gohmert, and he had it out big time with Eric Holder. And I don't know about you, but when I was listening to this, it sounded to me like Eric Holder was threatening Louis Gohmert. I'm going to play the clip, let you decide for yourself.
I renew my request.
Well, I think what we promised to do is to provide you and your staff with...
Sir, I've read you what your department promised, and it is inadequate, and I realize that contempt is not a big deal to our Attorney General, but it is important that we have proper oversight.
You don't want to go there, buddy.
So,
you don't want to go there, okay?
Can you believe that? Let's listen to it again. Let's listen again.
Oversight.
You don't want to go there, buddy.
So,
you don't want to go there, okay?
I mean, can you believe the audacity of this guy? I mean, not only does it sound like, to me, he's threatening Louis Gohmert, but he has the audacity to say don't go there about the contempt when he hasn't even been willing to submit to any sort of checks and balances that would clear him of any of these charges. And he continues to try and clean it up afterwards. Let's continue on with the clip. He knows what he did wrong.
I don't want to go there?
No.
About the contempt?
You should not assume that that is not a big deal to me. I think that it was inappropriate. I think it was unjust. But never think that that was not a big deal to me. Don't ever think that.
Well, I'm just looking for evidence, and normally we're known by our fruits, and there have been no indications that it was a big deal because your department has still not been forthcoming in producing the documents that were the subject of the contempt. Now, let me move on. There have been other questions asked about
the documents that we were prepared to make available then, we're prepared to make available now, that would have obviated the whole need. This was all about the gun lobby and a desire to have a...
And then he starts talking about the gun lobby. He thinks that him releasing and losing fully automatic weapons to Mexican cartels in an attempt to be Mr. Big Head Honcho Attorney General, get a big bust, losing the weapons and botching the whole ordeal, ending in hundreds of people dying. He thinks that it's insulting and part of the gun lobby to question his resolve, to question the idea that he wouldn't want to get in trouble, or the fact that he has not turned over these documents. I mean, he's trying to say it's never been about the documents, it's never been about the gun lobby, and we were willing to turn over this, that, and the other. I'm calling shenanigans on that one. That's bull. Absolute nonsense. If he was even serious for half a second about this whole situation, he would have turned over those documents without the requests. Why would he wait? Why would he not just turn them over and exonerate himself that way? It's real simple. Just turn them over. If you're innocent, turn them over. You can't make these audacious claims in Congress where the entire American public can see it and start making claims about the gun lobby and partisanship being involved in the investigation when you're not even turning over the evidence to defend yourself. Okay? Congress did make a request for these documents, and it's well documented that the DOJ did not give them over. They did not submit these documents. And he can say whatever stuff about delays he wants to. It's real easy to send an email or a box of papers over. Just send over all the ones that would prove you did nothing wrong. I mean, you cannot make this argument in Congress that it was a wild goose chase or that the investigation was all about headhunting for politics or anything like that. You cannot make those claims if you have done nothing to defend yourself but get in front of or get behind a microphone and make political partisan bickering your only defense. You can't shout gun lobby and claim to be defending yourself. You can't claim that their investigation has no backing if you have no defense. Now understand, I am the first one to say innocent until proven guilty, but in this situation, he screwed up. Either own up to the screw up and show that you did everything you could, or submit the documents and show what did go wrong. If you did make errors, what's the worst that they're going to do? Nothing. It's Congress. They're divided. The Senate would never do anything like that. It's not hard to get this issue solved. And it's not hard to take responsibility for something. The problem that people have with politicians these days is that when they get caught with their pants down, they just say, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm wearing pants. That's exactly how politics works nowadays. It's not like it used to be where when you get caught doing something wrong, you just admit to it. I mean, look at Bill Clinton. He swore up and down he did nothing wrong, used all the lawyer tricks he could think of, and then DNA tests come back, science comes back, and he has to admit that he perjured himself and lied. It's very simple. Defend yourself if you can. If not, own up to it or say nothing. Say nothing. There is no options if you did something wrong. There's a reason the system works this way. Congress has the right to get these documents to investigate the situation. How can anybody be held accountable if you're not allowed to investigate? Let's continue on with the rest of the clip. Gomer gets angry and starts letting him have it.
So we've been trying to get to the bottom of Fast and Furious where people died, where at least a couple hundred Mexicans died, and we can't get the information to get to the bottom of that. So I don't need lectures from you about contempt.
And I don't need lectures from you either.
It is very difficult to deal with asking questions. As a former judge, I'd never have asked questions of someone who's been held in contempt. We waited till the contempt was purged, and then we asked questions.
Now, that's exactly right. Gomer is a former judge. He's not a stupid individual. Now, he has made some salacious claims in the past, such as the whole terror babies thing. But keeping in mind that whole fiasco, the terror babies thing, was a hypothetical that he thought up. Illegal immigrants coming into the country and having kids and using that as a way to stay in the country. Why couldn't terrorists do the same? And, you know, he has merit in that legally it is something that could be done. It just sounds ridiculous to the average person, and so it's become a partisan talking point against Gomer. But the man's not an idiot. He's not. Just because he talks slow doesn't mean he's stupid. And as many of my listeners are Southerners, they know that to be true. I've been known to have a little drawl come out of my mouth from time to time, and it does not indicate a lack of intelligence. Not in the least. And Gomer's got a point. It's real simple to submit the documents. And more importantly, nowhere else in the American government could you get away with being held in contempt and then somehow be treated and respected as an equal co-branch of government or something, or an equal representative, or somebody who is capable of fulfilling your duties in your office. It should be sorted out. The contempt should be handled before anything else. This is not a hard concept. This is not something that should be difficult for anyone of any party to understand. If there is evidence that a person has contempt of Congress or contempt of court, you deal with the contempt, then you get back to the matter at hand. But for whatever reason, Eric Holder has not had to deal with these contempt charges. He has not been exonerated of them. And to think that he comes in there with the audacity that he shouldn't have to answer questions, that he shouldn't be held accountable by Congress, is insane. And because of the way the media portrays this, and because of the way that the government works with Democrats having two branches, they get away with these shenanigans. They get away with pulling whatever they want because nobody's holding them accountable. And literally, Congress is angry that they can't hold this guy accountable, and he's angry that they're trying to. Let's finish up the rest of this clip.
Let me ask you, do you think someone who believes marriage is between a man and a woman violates the civil rights of a same-sex couple?
Somebody's personal belief?
Yes.
No.
How about if they have a business and they believe that?
If they have a business, if a business has
if it's a private business and the owners of the private business believe marriage is between a man and a woman, are they violating a same-sex couple's civil rights, in your opinion?
Well, that's obviously a matter that is under consideration by the courts, and we have taken a position on that. I wouldn't want to get into something that is, as I said, a pending matter.
Well, it is your opinion that matters on whether you tell attorneys general how to act in the states, or how you approach businesses or individuals that have this biblical view that the president had when he was a senator in 2008. So I thought it was rather important.
Now, of course, Gomer's going off on a tangent with, you've got the different cases that have gone on with the photographer that refused to take business from the lesbian couple in their commitment ceremony. You've had bakeries that have refused to bake stuff for same-sex couples. And I've made my opinion very clear. I think a business should be able to make decisions on this without government intervention, and government, doesn't need to get involved, because the gay community will not give them business, and it will hurt their business in the long run. I mean, it's just not smart for somebody not to take money based on something like this. If they choose to do it, whatever. That's their thing. But I just, he went off on a tangent, but I wanted to kind of play the whole clip in its entirety before moving on, to be fair. Now, I want to play another clip here. Eric Holder went into a Democrat action group, a Democrat committee, so to speak, and basically whined about the way Gomer treated him today. And, of course, Trey Gowdy had a good clip that he had a good sound bite that was there today, but I'm not going to play that one because it wasn't that good. It was very technical, and he was just saying that it was about drug laws. But we'll get into that later. I want to play Eric Holder complaining about how mean Gomer was. Mr. Gomer was so mean.
Since the day that I became Attorney General of the United States of America in 2009, I have been proud to stand alongside you in supporting efforts to advance the cause of justice that has always been at the center of this administration's work. I am pleased to note that the last 5 years have been defined by significant strides and by lasting reforms, even in the face of unprecedented, unwarranted, ugly, and divisive adversity. If you don't believe that, you look at the way, and forget about me. You look at the way the Attorney General of the United States was treated yesterday by a House committee. Had nothing to do with me. Forget that. What Attorney General has ever had to deal with that kind of treatment? What president has ever had to deal with that kind of treatment?
Okay, so here he is complaining to this group about how divisive Republicans are and how the Democrats stand for justice and progress and what's right. This coming from the same guy that investigated hate crime charges against Zimmerman for defending himself. And, of course, he was acquitted, so either you believe that he did nothing wrong because it's what the jury said, who saw all the evidence, or you believe the justice system doesn't work. You get to pick and choose. You can't have one or the other. And Attorney General Eric Holder's been in contempt for the Fast and Furious stuff. He has been charged with not upholding the law as it is his job for various stuff like drugs and everything. And we'll get into that here in a minute. We'll have more.
Hi, this is Larry O'Connor from WMAL in Washington, D.C., and you're listening to Vigilant Liberty Radio.
All right, we're back. I want to continue on with Eric Holder a bit here because I'm not done with him yet. First off, he's been charged with contempt of Congress. Allegations have been leveled against him, and he's not cleared himself yet with regards to Fast and Furious and submitting those documents. And then you've also got the IRS targeting. He's going to be called to do contempt charges against Lois Lerner after that House vote on Wednesday, and a myriad of other things. And he's basically shirked his responsibility. And then you've got instances where the Department of Justice went after Zimmerman for possible hate crime investigation, civil rights investigation, despite the fact that a jury of his peers found him innocent of murder. It was self-defense, and either you believe the system works or it doesn't. You can't have it both ways. And not only that, but Trey Gowdy went after him for a memo he put out about drug criminalization. Now, the way it works is the Attorney General has the job of instructing attorneys general around the country, federal attorney generals in the states at different levels. And so this memo he sent out said that if these drug users that are caught meet certain criteria, then don't put down the amount of drugs that they had. And what that does is it throws out the requirement that the judge hit that person with a mandatory minimum. And so basically what this does is it's an attempt to circumvent laws on the books. And every state has different drug laws on the books, and they're not negotiable. These different drug laws are passed into law by Congress, and that's it. Now, people have heard me talk about it. You've all heard me, and you know that I am against drugs being a criminal offense here in the States. I think that drugs everywhere should be legal because it doesn't make sense for us to send people to jail and spend taxpayer dollars doing that when these people are putting something in their own bodies. They're doing it to themselves. Now, I'm not talking about, people that are dealing to kids. I'm not talking about gangbangers with guns and the violent offenders. I'm talking about just, Joe Blow using marijuana, etc. What I'm talking about is kind of what they're doing here with the DOJ, but I have a difference of opinion on how they're going about it because it matters how you get there. And we've had this conversation on a previous show, but, gonna beat it until it happens. Gonna get it into the heads of everyone. Now, with this memo that went out, he's basically taken the law into his own hands. He's decided, and this is under Obama's direction, he's decided to get rid of the mandatory minimum sentencing for people who have certain amounts. And I have a problem with that because it discourages Congress from passing a law to legalize or decriminalize small amounts of drugs that are for personal use. If somebody wants to get themselves stoned out of their mind, I don't care. There is no government need to interfere in that. If somebody wants to be a moron and get stoned out of their mind and do all the heroin and cocaine in the world, I don't care. It's their life they're ruining. Let them ruin it. If that's a choice they want to make, fine. Forget it. There's no sense in us spending, millions, if not billions of dollars on jails and parole officers for drug users who got caught with a joint. That's just stupid. You're ruining people's lives over a joint. It's the dumbest thing you can conceive of. And I know a lot of people have something against dopers. I had a conversation with a Vietnam vet about it not too long ago, and he was saying, he can't forgive the dopers from the hippie era because when he came back, they egged him, and they were violent. And, of course, this has nothing to do with drugs, but that's the opinion that a lot of these old-timers hold and a lot of the veterans. And I understand the animosity, but the drugs didn't do that. And more importantly, if they were on weed, they'd be too lazy to do anything but sit on the couch. So that whole argument about them being violent is moot. Now, of course, there should be, anti-smoking and driving laws or at least some sort of regulation on that front, because there's no way that people can trust, look at all the drunk driving stuff that's going out there. But there are arguments on how to enforce those aside from the way they're doing it now with massive tickets and jail time. But if we just look at this one memo, this one factor here, where he has decided that he is going to instruct his employees to not enforce the laws that they swore an oath to uphold, we find ourselves in a situation where the executive branch is deciding what laws are. And that is unacceptable. It is unacceptable for the government to circumvent the legislative branch in that way. If Eric Holder and the Democrats want these laws changed, then they should push for that. And I'm okay with that. They should push for, small drug amounts to be decriminalized. It's a good start. It's a good step in the right direction. Who cares if people want to get high? It's stupid. And it really blows my mind when you've got the Attorney General getting away with all this stuff and nobody says a word. And a lot of the drug supporters, a lot of the libertarians and the Democrats out there, they agree that it's the right move because it keeps they think that's a step in the right direction, having the executive branch just decide what's going to be the law because of what they think is right, as opposed to going to Congress and getting the law passed or challenging the law in the courts for constitutionality. Now, granted, I think the Supreme Court justices are old and senile and don't know as much as people think they do. And that's perfectly clear with the Obamacare rulings, if nothing else. But when you look at just this, it is unfathomable that you can decide which parts of the law are to be enforced and which ones aren't. I mean, imagine if he put out a memo that said leftist groups that commit violence should not be treated as harshly as terrorist groups because they're just trying to make America more progressive and that's a good thing for the country. Imagine if he put that memo out. Well, the whole world would lose their mind. The whole world would absolutely go crazy. I mean, America would just be fractured and splintered all over about that. I mean, the whole right would lose their mind. Some of the Democrats would join in too, because obviously, anarchists and socialists and communists that are violent, it's going to be a problem. But the fact of the matter is, this is in the same vein. This is the same train of thought, that they are above the law, that the law itself doesn't matter because they don't think it's correct. And a lot of this is prevalent in every side of politics. You've got people in the libertarian movement that think, disobeying unjust laws, civil disobedience is correct. And that's fine. Civil disobedience is correct. You shouldn't obey a law that's unjust. It's unconstitutional. Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. Granted, you have to keep in mind that you also have instances where that really backfired, like Shays' Rebellion. And you have to deal with the consequences of those actions. But with Attorney General Eric Holder, because he believes that drugs shouldn't be criminalized, he's just not enforcing that law as it should be, as a baby step in that direction, as opposed to lobbying Congress to get it passed, or better yet, doing his part to lobby for a change in sentencing for, say, a heroin or cocaine addict to do time in a rehab facility rather than prison for the nonviolent ones. Get them clean rather than get them punished. And that's not what's going on. As opposed to an alternative sentence, he's just flat out getting rid of mandatory minimums and changing it to where you could get a really far left-leaning judge that literally gives him a $50 fine, or gives him time served, which could be however long they were in booking. And that's the sort of thing we run into. And it destroys the way the system works, and it's this sort of perversion that makes the rest of the corruption in government possible. When you've got people that circumvent the way things are supposed to work, they try to get off on technicalities like this. This is where we get all the problems with government, when people don't go through the right channels, the proper channels, and aren't punished for it. So while you can support, drug use, or the right to drug use rather than the actual use, the right to drug use, like me, you can support the idea that somebody that wants to be stupid should be allowed to be stupid, because that honestly opens up more jobs for the rest of us, and get rid of the taxpayer burden for it on top of that. You can support that stuff without supporting what Attorney General Holder is doing, because what he's doing is circumventing the law, and that sort of thing leads to just more circumventing of the law. And this is the same sort of thinking that goes with, the leftist groups being omitted, and the IRS scandal. This is the same exact thing that is alleged against Lois Lerner, that they think conservative groups are wrong, and so they need to take more action against them in these 501c3, 501c4 groups, that they need to use the powers of government to further their agenda. Now, that's true in Congress, where they are supposed to pass laws, but when you've got the Attorney General of the United States, who is not in a legislative body, who is not in the business of making laws, it's unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable to have a person in his position dictating what the law is. That's not his job. His job is to prosecute the laws, period. Just to prosecute the laws. That's his job. When you have somebody else in power, this could go a lot worse. This is a dangerous precedent to set unless Congress finds a way to punish him. So this contempt charge that they were talking about, him being held in contempt, that is exactly what needs to happen. He needs to be held in contempt. He needs to be punished for it. He needs to be disbarred. He needs to be removed from office. Now, he needs something to happen, because Congress needs to make it very clear, and Democrats should be on board with this too. Congress needs to make it clear that when it passes a law, when it demands documents, it gets them or you get burned. Period. Because when you get people like this in office and you continue to circumvent the law, all you do is breed more circumvention. Partisanship breeds more partisanship. Look at the difference between the World Wars and the Vietnam War or the Korean War. When you had World War I and World War II vets coming home, they were celebrated with massive parades. And when you had Vietnam vets coming home, they were getting egged. But people don't know that in World War I and World War II, there were protests. There were people holding signs outside of the White House calling the president the Kaiser. In World War I, And that's always been the way. There's always been war protesters. And I'm not saying you shouldn't protest war, but what I'm saying is these movements of partisanship grow more and more partisan as it goes. And it kind of tempered itself when you had uniting factors like 9/11, the World War II, World War I. When you had something to unite the people like that behind, ending fascism, saving lives, that kind of thing. in many cases, it unites the people and it kind of removes the partisanship. Now, granted, as the Bush era went on and he went into Afghanistan and Iraq, the partisanship ramped back up again because he went to war. And it wasn't with a country like Germany who was invading its neighbors, so to speak. I mean, granted, we can have a whole discussion about war on terrorists and going in and all that, but the point I want to make is that the partisanship is going to keep ramping up until it hits another breaking point or another uniting point. So we're either going to see some sort of catastrophe in the future on a scale of war that is heavily supported, or something more fracturing, a break in the fracturing rather than something to unite the country like war or terrorism. For example, the Civil War. That was the last massive partisan divide, and it was nasty business. But that was the last time this country was split like this, in my opinion. You've got the American Revolution and the Civil War as times when the country split because of partisan issues that were irreconcilable. There you go, that's the word. We'll have more when we come back.
This is Kevin Jackson of the Black Spreaker Radio Show. Listen to Vigilant Liberty Radio.
What's going on in your head? I think your brain is gone dead.
All right, we're back. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is one of my favorite subjects, which all you regular listeners are going to find this very familiar. It's not uncharted waters here. But wage debates. I want to talk about the minimum wage argument that happened. I want to talk about what President Obama did with these executive orders. Now, the president came out saying women on average in America make 77 cents for every dollar a man makes. And then they have this Equality Day thing, which symbolizes how many extra days in a year that women have to work to catch up from men from the previous year. Now, as many of you know, and I hope all of you know this, it's complete crap. It's absolute nonsense. Now, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's a government organization, if you look at different think tanks on the matter, it's not a crazy issue that's hard to figure out. It's not a super difficult concept. When it comes to people making wages in this country, you don't get paid less because you have different giblets from the person next to you. Your fun parts don't determine your paycheck. Do you know how we know this? Because A, that would be stupid, and B, because of the Equality of Pay Act in 1964. It was passed the same time the Civil Rights Act was passed. And it says that you can't discriminate based on gender, on religion, on race, etc., etc. You can't discriminate on pay based on something stupid and arbitrary like that. Now, the problem with the president's numbers, and even some of the BLS numbers, is that the numbers on average do reflect that women in this country are making less money as a group. Now, what that means is that this includes women who leave the workforce for 5, 10, 20 years to have kids. It includes women who take jobs in teaching as opposed to being CEO of a corporation, or jobs in retail and fashion rather than jobs at Microsoft or Google. Women who get higher educations make more than men on average with a higher education. Now, this is a partisan argument that the Democrats try to make to perpetuate the war on women. And they keep trying to pass this law, this Paycheck Equality Act, And they do it, they've done it several times now, and it keeps getting shut down because obviously the act itself is complete nonsense. The act itself does nothing to improve equality. On the contrary, it actually hurts the free market and the ability of corporations, businesses to set pay. And what I mean by that is it makes it harder for the government, for companies to pay people based on experience, based on merit, based on education, stuff like that. It makes it almost impossible to get those done. And it becomes one of these scenarios where what is more important? Is it more important that the country be split 50-50 in terms of how the money's made? Or is it more important that people who work hard get paid for working hard? That people who get a good education get paid for getting that good education? Which is more important? The more experienced worker making more, or the woman being equal to the man in terms of paychecks, on average? To anybody who understands economics, they know that it's more important that a person with more experience, with more education, with better references, makes more. That working harder comes with higher rewards. Now, a lot of people will make the argument that investing in a woman in terms of a hire is more of a risk because they are likely to have children and therefore leave the job. But at the same time, obviously that would have to come with an indication like they've just been hired or need to be hired or something to that extent. They've just been married and might have kids, something like that. But that's something obviously an employer would discuss with the woman. And a lot of times because of this, women will take, they'll ask for a benefit that's non-monetary, like more flexible work hours or lower work hours. For instance, women are 2 times more likely to work less than 40 hours a week. Men are 2 times more likely to work more than 40 hours a week. Now, it's things like this that contribute to this wage gap. If you look at all the different factors like that, if you look at men being more likely to work more hours, women being more likely to work less hours, women being more likely to take lower pay in order to get more flexible hours, women choosing fields that pay lower because they are low risk, like teaching, as opposed to high risk jobs like lumberjack, coal miner, roughneck on a oil rig, offshore oil rig, contracting jobs, plant jobs, stuff like that. All of that stuff is something that could be and does affect this gap. Not to mention when a woman leaves the workforce for an extended period of time because they've had kids or they're going to have kids. These are all situations that lead to disparity on average in pay. But when you look at a woman with the same experience, with the same education, in the same job, they always make the same. They don't get paid less. Now, in rare instances where that does happen, rare instances, it's always because the woman did not negotiate her salary. Now, there is very rarely, and I've never seen an example of this, and I've never seen a documented example of this anywhere, where a woman just flat out gets a lower starting salary just because. But a business has a right to negotiate the salary, and men are 4 times more likely than women to negotiate their salary. They will have a conversation about what they need to make, and they will ask for more than they get offered because they know that first offer is a low ball. So they will ask for more. I know that. The statistics show that. And ironically enough, that 4 times more likely to negotiate salary thing, that's from the American Association of University Women. That's a woman's organization that put that stat out there. It's the same people that back the ban bossy movement because they understand it's not a discrimination issue in terms of what businesses are doing. It's an issue based on the way women are raised because less of them are pushed to be executives. Less of them are pushed to be CEOs, to be in the tech industry, to be in business. They're pushed into areas of the economy that pay less because they want to have families later, or because they have families now, or because they simply just don't like the idea of a cutthroat business environment. And in some cases, women are less likely to want to be leaders because they don't want to be called bossy and they want to be well-liked. And there's statistics that show men, as they climb the ladder and become more successful and are more cutthroat, are actually liked more. So there's that as well. And you can't disparage that point in terms of what it means for women in the workplace and stuff like that. But the point is that these are not instances of businesses giving smaller paychecks. These are not instances of discrimination that the government needs to step in and start crying civil rights. And what's interesting about it is that the statistics are lies, and everybody who takes 2 seconds to look at them knows they're lies, and everybody who does their research knows they're lies. That includes the White House. And it's perfect because Jay Carney was caught with his pants down big time when this was brought up. A conservative think tank put out a study showing that the White House actually pays 88 cents for every dollar a man makes. Women in the White House, on average, are making less money than men. Period. That's it. They're making 12% less on average. And it was even more. The gap was even bigger than that at the White House before. Now, what's ironic about this is that when confronted with that information, when Jay Carney was confronted about it, the White House said, well, that's just because of differences in experience, and there's more women in lower-level jobs, like clerical jobs and assistant jobs and stuff like that. But high-level advisors, men and women make the same. Different jobs like that, men and women in the same jobs in the White House make the same, but the women overwhelmingly work the lower level jobs in the White House, which accounts for that gap. But for whatever reason, Jay Carney and the White House have not bothered to attribute that information to the rest of the economy. For some reason, the fact that there is a wage gap in the White House, and there's a good reason for it, does not reflect in the same way the economy does. The metric that they use to measure the economy and then blame conservatives for not wanting to do anything about it does not apply to the White House. And that's what Jay Carney said. And, of course, they've backtracked this, and they're trying to say that they're going to fix it somehow, one way or the other. And what's basically going to happen, in my opinion, what I think is going to happen, is that they're going to bump the pay of select female workers at the White House in order to make this gender gap disappear at the White House. But, in reality, they're going to be giving women pay they don't deserve simply because they have different giblets from the men in the White House. That's exactly what's going to happen, so they can hit that magic 1-for-1 ratio despite it not being earned, because they're not going to defend it. And it's more important for the president to score political points. So I bet he goes for it his last year in office. I bet you they get into the 94 to $1 range, and then the last year they get to $1. If they get $1 before that, I'll be very surprised. If they manage to do it sooner, it would be very surprising. They said they're going to try and do something about it. We're going to see. I don't think they will. I think it'll take them a while to get around to it. I think it'll be in a way to try and support Hillary. They'll do that as like a last hurrah in the White House, and it's a very real possibility. So we'll see what happens. But what's interesting is that Democrats in Congress have basically come out and said that's exactly what they want. They don't want people to be paid based on merit. They want to make sure women are making exactly the same as men on average. They said that's the way it should be across the country. This one of the senators that was mad about the act not being passed today, she said, in some people, is a senator from Connecticut, she said, some women in America, it's not like that. They don't make the same as men, and we need to fix it. And she was using the example of Congress, saying that all congressmen and women make the same no matter what. no matter what they bring to the table, etc. What she doesn't realize is that it's a public sector job, and you can't exactly base it on performance. You get elected based on performance. I mean, these are the same Democrats that are calling for a pay raise for a Congress that's got a 10% approval rating in the low teens, sometimes lower than that. I believe the lowest like 8% or something. But when you look at what they're saying and what they're doing, and then what they're talking about for the country, these people clearly have no understanding of economics, and it's clear that it's more important to them that they hit these equality numbers than people be paid based on their work ethic, based on their education, based on the years they've put in, their experience, their skill set. They don't care about that. They want women to get paid more because it's not fair that they had lacking experience or lacking education or what have you, or they've asked for more flexible hours. They think they should still be paid the same no matter what. And that's the most disgusting part about this, is that these are supposed to be the best and the brightest in the country, running things, which we obviously know not to be true, because if they're the best and the brightest, they'd be in the private sector like the rest of us. But when you've got these people, Audrey is mad. She's mad. She wants more pay. She thinks that the boy dog upstairs is getting paid more than she is, and she's upset about it. I'm just kidding. She's actually barking at me because I was going to say that anyway. But the point is, you've got congresswomen in the White House saying that it doesn't matter what you bring to the table. It only matters that you get equal pay, and that is absolutely disgusting. And I think it's about high time that Americans raised hell like Audrey is right now to make that happen. See, she's very angry and upset about equal pay. Tell him how upset you are about equal pay. You tell him? Tell him. Equal pay. All right, that's it for tonight. I hope you'll have a good evening. We'll see you next week. This is America Our Way. I am Dustin Hoyt. You're listening to Vigilant Liberty Radio.
This show is copyright by VLR Media. All opinions of panelists and guests are their own and may not reflect the opinion of VLR Media, the host, or anyone else.